Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey Bill, how you doing today?
Angela, I have never been this happy. How about yourself?
I am tippy-tappy. So, Bill, one of the most common issues we've seen in growing leaders is the skill of learning to delegate, of letting go of the work that you did before, or letting go of turning the wrenches, if you will. So what happens is the individual contributor gets promoted to a leadership position, or a leader of a small team gets more responsibilities in a bigger team, and they end up working 12, 16-hour days trying to get it all done. This is not a recipe, I think you'd agree, for long-term success.
I don't know what you're talking about. I thought we were supposed to do it that way.
So today's episode is all about how to set yourself up for bigger roles, and in doing so, growing your successors. This episode applies whether you're an individual contributor or a team lead of any size.
Yeah, another situation for why this discussion is so important is when you find yourself wanting to move up to broader responsibilities and you're told you're too valuable where you are. And certainly I've seen that any number of times. I've even been told that at some point in my career. So, from your manager's standpoint, they're saying, well, who would do what you're doing? How would we be able to get the work done if you left? Of course, we all know, even though it's a little bit cliche, the cemetery is filled with indispensable people. But if you're trying to set yourself up for being able to move to other roles or other projects within your company, you got to do it in a way that you don't leave your team or your boss hanging with no way to smoothly transition between you and your relief. In short, you're trying to make it easy for your manager to say yes when you want to move on to your next role.
Yeah, because we all want to grow in our careers, right? And so let's get into it. How do you set yourself up to grow in your career? What's the first thing you'd recommend?
Now, so first up, I would say you got to shift your mindset from how do I do this well to how do I make this run well when I'm not here? And this is maybe the hardest part, to get that shift in mindset, because so often people think things like it's just easier or faster if I do it myself, or they won't do it like I want it done, or I'm the one who does it the best. And when that's your mindset, it's going to be very difficult to let go of the reins. So just recognize you're limiting yourself when you do that sort of thing. And when you have that mindset, you're putting your own ceiling on your career when you aren't willing to move from being a doer to being a builder. So how do you start? Well, I would start by breaking your role sort of into three buckets. What's the critical knowledge that you have? The tribal knowledge, the context, all the history for what you do. When you've been part of a team for a significant period of time, you know the history of when and why some decisions were made. You know the failures, the successes, the reasons for why people were hired or fired. You know where the gaps are, where the notes and the documents are stored. This is the knowledge that's critical to the team. And so we'll get into how to approach this knowledge in just a little bit. But also, there's the decision authority piece of it. What only you are allowed to approve, what needs to go up the chain and how that's done, and what doesn't need any approvals. The team's making decisions and they just let you know. And finally, the relationships piece. Who relies on you and why? This includes the people both inside and outside the organization. So think key people within your project or your branch or department, as well as the key customers and stakeholders with whom you've built long-term trust. So if you disappeared for 3 months, what would break? That's your roadmap to start figuring out how to set up your successor. If the project would die without you there, you're going to be stuck in it for a very long time.
And if you disappear for 3 months and it's all smooth sailing when you get back, then you've prepared your team for you to move on to your next role.
And just as importantly, you've prepared your boss, the person who would let you go or not let you go. You've prepared them like, oh, I guess it's okay if Angela leaves because they seem to be able to function without her.
That is typically what I got, by the way.
I was going to leave that alone.
All right, so people have to identify their critical knowledge. They identify their decision authority, what they approved and why, and they identified some key relationships. The next piece that they need to do is kind of document that, like really think about what it is that we do, why we do it this way, what to watch out for, and how do you know if you're succeeding. And we're not talking about generic SOPs or standard operating procedures or anything like that. We're actually we're looking to capture the thinking behind the work. So, what are the decision frameworks that are made in some of those decision authorities that you have? When X happens, I prioritize Y because, and you really start writing that down and documenting it. And then with those relationships, what are those key trust relationships you've built? Who's internal and external to the company that you interact with? And what makes that relationship special? So let's give an example. Maybe there's someone on the contract team you take out to lunch every time you visit the city where they work. Note this in your documentation and how important that relationship is. What's the drumbeat for how often you check in with particular customers or stakeholders or any decision makers that support your program or your project or so on? And then when you start documenting those relationships, also talk about what are your preferences that your key stakeholders have, especially for communication. Who makes decisions that affect the program, whether that's funding or even getting people assigned to your team, or whether or not to invest in specific training or technology to help the program. Identify those people and their preferences for communication. Do you write them a summary email on a monthly basis? Do you have an office call with them regularly? How do they stay aware enough of your program that you have confidence they're still supporting the work that you're doing? And I'll pause and say, actually, this is exactly what I did when I was getting money internal to support building out the coaching program. I wrote a monthly summary to all the key stakeholders who were decision makers in whether or not I got to continue getting funding for the program. That talked about our key activities, our key relationships, any metrics that we had associated with the program, and just any wins that we had. And that really kept my program top of mind to the key decision makers, and I continued to get funding and also more funding because they saw that I was actually taking the time to, on a monthly basis, give them regular updates in addition to the regular briefings and whatnot that I would give.
Yeah, this is worth another foot stomp. So you talked about having your internal customers, and I had talked about making sure that your boss is okay with you moving on. But the discussion about key stakeholders and particularly external customers with whom you've built those trust relationships, they may have more influence than you'd like with the organization you actually work for when they say, oh, no, you can't let Bill leave. I need him to keep doing the work for me that he's been doing for the past year. Well, maybe Bill wants to move to the next job. No, you can't let him go. And so now you're not only convincing your boss, you're convincing external customers with whom you've built those great relationships. And so that's going to have to be a part of making people comfortable that you have a transition plan, you've really thought about it, and you have people lined up that could do the job. It doesn't die without you.
Yeah. And we'll get into some key strategies for making that happen, in making sure your external customers, for example, know who and have confidence in some new decision authority that's on the program or on your project, and we'll get into that here shortly. But another piece too to document even before we get there is what are some common failure points and how do you recover? So what have been some issues that have come up during your time on the team, and how do you operate to resolve them effectively? What team members do you depend on to respond to problems, and perhaps which team members solve specific problems for you? All of that is part of your key relationships as well. And then also just remember that metrics that actually matter and are tracked by the management chain are things you also want to document. We've seen leaders who believe that platitudes and testimonials are all that are needed to justify their work. And those are important. Don't get me wrong. Those absolutely help tell the story. They talk about how much the customer loves the product. Those are great, but that's simply not enough. Focus on metrics that demonstrate ROI. This sets up your successor armed with solid data to continue to build on the work that you've begun. That is what truly empowers a successor. So again, the structure that we're talking about in terms of documentation is first to think about what we do, why we do it this way, what to watch out for, and how to know you're succeeding. And once you have that documented, now you start thinking about your successors. And Bill, you started bringing this up a few minutes ago. How do you propose someone approach that?
Well, that's going to depend on a few factors. If you're an individual contributor, you may or may not see a successor that's on the team you're already on. You might know somebody outside your team who might make a good fit. But in any case, you're going to have to be able to identify the key skills and abilities required for your job. So take your original job description and update it to the job that you have today. What knowledge is needed, what skills, what are the abilities that your manager will want your successor to have, right? That's the keeping in mind the people who will actually say you can or can't move. That's your management chain. It's not just an individual decision. So you got to be thinking about from their view, what's my successor got to have to make them comfortable to let me move on? Or perhaps maybe you're already a team lead. You may see one or more people within the team who could take over as your successor, or you may know somebody else from another team who'd do a great job. You identify those people as potential folks in your transition plan. And depending on your role, you might also be required to compete the job. So then if you're going to have to compete it, then you're really going to have to talk about the KSAs, the key skills and abilities that would be required for a successor. And do the same thing we recommended for the individual contributor. Look at your original job description, update it for the role that you have today. So when you're looking for your successor, look for somebody that's got pertinent experience in doing your type of work. I guess that's sort of obvious. But you're also looking for an attitude. So somebody who's curious and has a willingness to ask hard questions. They exhibit good judgment, they have emotional maturity, and they have solid team skills, and they're interested in growing, not just in making the wheels turn. So you're not looking for a mini-me. Mini-me does not complete you, and you're not going to find somebody who's going to run the team or do the job exactly like you would, just like you don't do the work exactly like your predecessor. You might want to talk to a few people on your team about succession plans and give some time to see who rises to the top, who's ready to take on the role when you're ready to move on. And then do sort of a gradual shift once you've figured out who that should be. Start having them shadow you. Invite them to discussions, phone calls, meetings that you have where they might not normally attend. And start copying them on emails that are pertinent. And have them watch you give briefings about the program. They start to observe you, and then give them some time after each briefing or event and let them ask you some questions about how that went. And then start to give them some shared ownership. Let them start to fulfill the responsibilities that used to be yours, and let them start giving briefings and facilitating meetings. And start having tough conversations with other people on the team when you got to get stuff done. Ultimately, you want them sort of leading with you present, and then you start to give them feedback one-on-ones, after big events.
That's a foot stomp too, Bill, to make sure that when you're giving them feedback, it's in private after the event, not in front of the...
Absolutely true. That's not a conversation for the whole team. That's a conversation for the people that you're trying to groom to be your successor. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting to the place where you let them lead, and then you do a debriefing afterward. Here's the key. You can do this even if you don't know your next role. This is all about building up your leadership bench. And ideally, you just don't want to wait until you're leaving to start doing this kind of behavior.
Yeah, you sure don't. You outlined a gradual process to having that person get to independent leadership, right? It's important to foot stomp the need to transfer authority, not just tasks. So a common mistake that leaders make is delegating the work, but keeping the decisions. And look, ideally, you'll have a successor who is a fire and forget type of person. And for those who may not be familiar with the term fire and forget, it comes from a missile term that basically describes firing off a missile that no longer needs your support or guidance in order to get to the target. So without your further intervention, when you give a task to a fire and forget person, you know that they're going to get the job done. In delegation terms, this means you can ask someone to complete a task, and that's the last time you have to think about it because you know it'll get done. We love those kind of people, don't we, Bill?
We really, really love fire and forget folks. Not that we want to forget about them. I just want to know that when I tell them to go do something, that's the last time that I have to worry about it.
You know they're going to get it done. They're GSD. Get stuff done, people. But the reality is, to reach that level of trust with someone requires some delegation with parameters first. The leader will ask a person to do some research on courses of action, but before taking action, come back and discuss them with you as the leader, and you ultimately give the head nod to proceed. And so how do you gradually learn about the person's decision making to grow into a fire and forget kind of relationship? Well, you have to delegate. The first thing you might delegate is let them run meetings. First, you're in the meetings, watching them to facilitate and lead. You see them in action and give them the feedback opportunity afterwards, like you talked about just a few minutes ago. And the next stage might be let them respond to stakeholders. So initially you might ask them to show you their draft emails or reports or whatever it is that you're going to ask them to submit to their stakeholders before they hit the send button. They do the work of structuring the response. They do the research. They make the suggestions, provide the update, whatever it might be. And then you read through it before they send it. But having it come from them is key. Rather than having them ghostwrite emails for you, which you also might want to do initially as a part of this graduated process, when the email comes from them specifically, it signals to the stakeholder that person has your responsibility, your trust, and authority, even if it's just informal, if it's not according to their title, it's that you're delegating their responsibility and authority to them. And then you can also let them make small mistakes with safety nets. So an example of that might be you have them lay out the schedule for the next set of deliverables or the next sprint, and then you have them go through it with you and make adjustments as necessary. So there's a safety net there. The key is to publicly reinforce their authority, defer to them as much as possible. And now, again, these aren't people that are for sure becoming your successor. These are just people that might be your successor, and you're testing the waters with them and seeing how they adjust and adapt, right? So it's a test for them as well. And so you say things when you signal their authority. You say things like, hey, Jane is leading this now. Connect with her directly. Don't come to me, basically. And that social signal really matters. So, Bill, we've talked about, these are people that we've thought about being successors. And you talked also earlier about, hey, your leadership chain also has to approve you leaving to go to a new position, right? When do you involve leadership in the process?
Well, so it's important to make sure that you're on the same page with the managers when you're considering an opportunity to move to your next role. I will tell you from personal experience that most managers are not thrilled about being surprised by personnel changes. That's worth a foot stomp right there. So do yourself a favor and engage with your boss and let him know what you're thinking about and what your desires are job-wise, and along with the fact that you actually have thought about the approach that's going to keep getting the work done and is growing the next set of leaders along the way. I mean, this isn't, hey, boss, on board. It's like, look, boss, I've really built some strong systems here. I'm starting to think about how I can add more value at the next level. So I've laid out a proposed succession plan over the next few months. And so when you couch it that way, as opposed to I'm done, I'm moving on, which of course you rarely have the opportunity to do unless you're moving on like out of the company. But when you do it in a much more professional way, you're going to do three things. Number one, you're going to let them know that you're ambitious. You want to move up. You're going to show that you're demonstrating maturity and thinking like a leader. And it's going to protect you, from the boss thinking this person doesn't give a rat's behind about what's left behind them. I mean, they're just abandoning us, and they think they're ready to move on, but they haven't done the work to make sure that we're ready to do that. So as you're getting ready to tell your boss that you're thinking about moving on, you got to start off by saying, so if I'm moving up to the next level, what's that person do that I don't do? What are the kinds of problems that they solve, and what are the decisions that they're making? And then start with small versions while you're still in your current job. Start doing cross-functional initiatives. Start doing some strategic planning that's beyond your specific tasking. Start mentoring others, just like we talked about for the past few minutes here, growing other people to be the new leaders. And start thinking about process redesigns. Start thinking about revenue and cost impact across different projects, not just across your own stuff. All of this discussion is really in support of making yourself promotable, not indispensable. And this is sort of crucial. If you're indispensable, you're trapped, right? If you're the only person who can get it done, nobody's letting you go. So instead, you should be focusing on being known for building other people and known for improving the systems and thinking bigger than your role. When your leadership starts to see the team run smoothly without you, that's when you're going to be ready for that transition.
Yeah. And truly all of this assumes that you are getting yourself ready to let go of your previous role, right? And that can be really uncomfortable. You might experience the feeling of like a loss of control if you're not doing the job anymore and you're having somebody else do it, right? You might actually have reduced visibility and recognition for what the team is doing. And by the way, when you're a leader, that's actually a good thing to recognize the people that are doing the work, right? And make sure that they have recognition and visibility up the chain. But the truth is that ego hits when they do things differently than you would have. If that is something that gets in your way, then that needs some serious self-reflection and recognition that, yes, that might be uncomfortable. And by allowing somebody else to do the job in the way that they would like to do it, it's actually setting you up for bigger and better responsibilities. And that's normal. Like you're moving on. Your growth now comes from demonstrating that you can lead larger and more complex teams than you did before. You're showing that you can think outside of your immediate environment, that your thoughts include a broader perspective of the organization and what the future needs are of that organization. So, in summary of everything we've talked about so far, every person who has grown in their roles and capacity within their careers has gone through the process of letting go what they used to do or lead and learning how to build bigger and more complex teams. When you hang on to the tasks that you had previously and then add on the requirements of a new role, it just doesn't scale. You will hit your career ceiling and not be able to advance. So learning to delegate and learning to be okay if the person doesn't do exactly what you do in any given situation and setting them up to be successful when you're gone, that provides you the ability to advance. So start by documenting what is unique to your role and who are the stakeholders you interact with. What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the role you have today? Not the role of the job description says you were hired for, but today's role. What is the historical knowledge around decisions made? And then look for the person or a few people who might be able to take over for you and start increasing their responsibilities with some parameters. Give them feedback Invite them to shadow you. Talk to your leadership about preparing for your next role and give them a transition plan with your recommendation of who could take over. When you move on, you'll leave with confidence the team will continue in your absence, and your manager will be confident of that as well. Hey, Bill, what did we miss?
Well, I guess the only thing that I would add as a second foot stomp for it was when you said talk to your leadership about preparing for your next role. I don't want to underestimate the importance of when I think of the leadership, it's not just the people in your immediate chain, but it's anybody who has come to depend on you for the work that you're doing. And so preparing all those folks who are potential people to say no, all of those folks inside and outside your organization with a really solid plan for how you've really thought through you're going to do the transition and the work will keep on going without you. Now you're setting yourself up for success. So
Absolutely.
If there's nothing else, I'd like to say thanks for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share it with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.